These are terrifying true stories of pizza delivery drivers encountering darkness. In our next story, it's a driver, or rather ex-driver, because this guy no longer works for Domino's. He was getting off shift around 2 a.m. when he got an order from a house in a rough neighborhood. The customer had called in right after the first snowfall of the winter, and the manager said he needed to get the food out quickly to avoid losing the customer to a competing pizza place. So this driver grabbed the food and headed into the dark, snowy night. As he drove through the neighborhood, he could tell that he was in a part of town where people kept to themselves, and no one really ventured out after dark. But he had made this delivery before, and he knew the streets like the back of his hand. Still, something felt wrong tonight, like there were eyes watching him from the darkness. He tried to shake off the feeling, but as he pulled up to the address, it came back in full force. He could see a lone figure standing in the driveway with his arms crossed and a cigarette dangling from his lips. He didn't have a hat on or anything to cover his face, so the driver couldn't help but stare. As he got closer, he could see that the man wasn't wearing a shirt, and it looked like his skin was stretched tight over his bones. It was then that the driver noticed something even more disturbing. The man's head was completely bald, but there was a large gash in the top of his skull, revealing the white, fatty substance that looked like candle wax slowly dripping down his forehead. He slammed on the brakes and started to scream, dropping the food on the ground. The man in the driveway took a long drag of his cigarette, then walked closer to the car and knocked on the window. The driver stared back in horror as the man continued to approach, his eyes boring into the driver's soul. The driver tried to get away, but he was paralyzed with fear. And then the man opened the car door and reached inside to grab the food. The driver screamed again and floored it, swerving onto the sidewalk and knocking over a mailbox as he sped away. He didn't stop until he reached the safety of the police station, where he recounted the horrifying experience to the officers on duty. They thanked him for his story, but dismissed it as the ravings of a lunatic. After all, how could anyone believe that a man could be missing the top of his skull? The driver insisted that what he saw was real, but no one listened. And eventually, he had to go home without getting the police involved. He still works for Domino's, but he only makes deliveries during the day. Our next story comes from a driver who used to work for Pizza Hut. One day, he got an order from a house in the suburbs. He didn't think much of it at the time. It was Saturday night, and most of the local college kids were out partying and looking for cheap eats. He pulled up to the house and rang the doorbell, but no one answered. He tried again, but still nothing. So he decided to knock on the front door. As he did, he heard what sounded like screams coming from inside the house. Confused, he knocked again, but this time louder. A few moments later, the door opened, and a woman stood in the doorway with a bloodied meat cleaver in her hand. She stared at the driver for a moment, then asked him, "Can I help you?" The driver stammered, trying to explain that he had a delivery for her, but the woman just shook her head and closed the door. He knocked again, but when she opened the door, he could see that she was holding the meat cleaver behind her back. She asked him again if he could help her, and the driver explained about the delivery. She sighed and put the meat cleaver down on the ground before reaching out for the food. As soon as the driver handed it over, she paid him and sent him on his way. He never thought much of it until he arrived back at the restaurant and told his manager about the experience. His manager didn't believe him at first, but when he insisted, she called the cops. They sent out a patrol car to check on the woman, but when the officer knocked on the door, no one answered. And when he looked through the window, he could see the bloody meat cleaver lying on the ground where it had been left. The driver was fired the next day, but he swears that what he experienced was no joke. In our final story, it's another driver who got an order from a house in a bad neighborhood. As he drove through the streets, he could feel the tension building. There was a full moon that night, and the shadows cast by the streetlights seemed to reach out and grab at him. When he pulled up to the house, he could see that it was abandoned and boarded up. He got out of the car and started walking up the driveway, but he turned back when he realized that he couldn't see any lights inside the house. Just as he reached for the doorbell, he heard a voice behind him say, "What do you think you're doing?" He spun around and saw a hulking shadow standing in the moonlight. The driver tried to call out to the figure, but his voice caught in his throat. The figure took a step forward, and the driver took off running. He could hear the creature crashing through the underbrush behind him, and he didn't dare look back to see if it was gaining on him. He ran as fast as he could until he reached his car and slammed the door shut. He locked the doors and started the engine, then floored it and raced away from the house. He didn't stop until he reached the nearest gas station, where he filled up and tried to calm down. When he finally regained his composure, he called the police and told them about the shadowy figure that had tried to attack him. The police were skeptical, but they sent out a patrol car to check on the driver's story. The officer found the house and reported that it was indeed abandoned and boarded up. They never caught the shadowy figure, and to this day, no one knows what it was. Some believe that it was the spirit of an angry resident who was disturbed by the driver's presence. Others believe that it was something more sinister, something that lurks in the darkness, just waiting for its next victim. For our next video, here's one from a while back about deadly hitchhikers in the backseat. And remember to subscribe if you haven't already.